My name is Grace Miller. I'm 38 years old, and last weekend my sister turned her own wedding into a stage to humiliate me. One minute I was standing by the bar with a drink, hoping I could slip out after the next song. The next minute she had her hand clamped around my wrist, pulling me through the crowd toward a tall man in a suit. She was beaming, the way she does when she smells a promotion. "You have to meet my boss," she said, loud enough that the nearest tables could hear. Then she tilted her head toward me and, with this little smirk that made my stomach drop, she added, "This is my failed little sister." For a second I thought I'd heard her wrong. Then the conversations around us faded, and I felt eyes turning to stare. My parents were standing right beside her. They didn't correct her. They laughed. "It's embarrassing to even have a child like that," one of them said, like it was some cute joke. Like I wasn't right there trying to remember how to breathe. That was when he really looked at me, her boss. His eyes went from my face to the name on my place card and back again, and the color drained out of his. He froze, like somebody had just knocked the air out of his chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with disbelief. "Hello?" he said slowly. "I didn't expect to see you here." The room went dead silent. If you've ever been torn down by the people who were supposed to love you the most, stay with me until the end and hit like and subscribe, because what happened after that is something my sister never saw coming. To understand why that one sentence at the wedding felt like a punch to the throat, you need to know how I became the family's failure sister in the first place. On paper, my life looks fine. I live in a small apartment in Evanston, just outside Chicago. I run my own business as a freelance digital marketing strategist. I build campaigns for local restaurants, small e-commerce brands, a couple of nonprofits. I pay my bills, I keep my clients happy, and I actually like what I do. But in my family, if you don't have a shiny job title in a glass office downtown, you're a disappointment. My little sister Lydia is the star. She works as a senior account director at a big advertising agency in the city, flies out for client meetings, posts rooftop cocktails and first-class boarding passes on Instagram. My parents eat it up. At every holiday, they brag about her latest promotion or the new car she leased, then turn to me and ask if I've thought about getting a real job yet. 6 months before the wedding, Lydia called me, sounding stressed. She said she was drowning in work and asked if I could look over a few things for her, just to help out. A few things turned out to be almost every contract tied to the wedding. The venue agreement had a hidden clause that would have charged her a massive fee if she missed a payment deadline by even one day. The photographer had slipped in an extra $5,000 travel fee that was never discussed. The band still hadn't received a deposit and was about to give the date to someone else. The florist's quote had quietly jumped up from the original estimate. Lydia brushed it off when I pointed it out. She said she was too busy to deal with it and told me I was better with the boring details anyway. So I handled it. I spent hours on the phone with the venue, pushing them to remove the penalty clause and lock in a more reasonable schedule. I went back and forth with the photographer until they agreed to honor the original rate. When the band threatened to cancel, I wired a deposit from my own savings account because Lydia couldn't move money around that week. I negotiated a 15% discount from the florist by comparing competitor quotes and offering them future referrals through my client network. By the time everything was secure, I had sunk just over $10,000 of my own money into deposits and rush fees to keep her perfect wedding from collapsing. I told myself I would get it back once things calmed down. Lydia never asked how it got fixed. She just sent me a text that said, "Knew you'd figure it out. You're good at that behind-the-scenes stuff." At the reception, I watched her float from table to table while her coworkers told her she had such an eye for detail and that the whole event was flawless. My parents smiled like they had personally designed the place. Nobody looked in my direction. Nobody knew that if I had done nothing, there wouldn't even have been a wedding for her to show off at. So when she stood there in front of her boss and introduced me as her failed little sister, it wasn't just cruel. It was a reminder that in their eyes, everything I do only matters if it makes her look better. And the way he looked at me that night, like he knew something my family didn't, was the first sign that this time, things were going to play out differently. The morning after the wedding, I woke up with my makeup still smeared on my face and my dress crumpled on the chair. My phone was full of photos Lydia had been tagged in, her laughing with her bridesmaids, her kissing her new husband, her standing with her boss and a cluster of coworkers, all of them holding champagne. In every picture, she looked like the main character. In every picture, I was either cropped out or nowhere to be seen. I almost called in sick to my own life that day, but I had client calls booked and invoices to send, so I dragged myself into the city. My office is a tiny rented space above a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. It's nothing fancy. One window, a secondhand desk, a whiteboard with half-erased campaign ideas, and a bookshelf with old marketing books and binders from projects I'd done years ago. I was halfway through answering emails when I heard footsteps in the hallway and a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, the last person I thought I'd ever see standing there was my sister's boss. In a simple navy suit, folder in hand, he looked more serious than he had at the wedding. "Grace Miller?" he asked, like he needed to double-check. I nodded, gripping the doorknob. "I'm Daniel Whitaker. We were introduced last night." My stomach clenched. "I remember," I said quietly. "I hope my family didn't waste too much of your evening." His expression flickered, almost guilty. "Actually, that's why I'm here," he said. "Do you have a few minutes?" I stepped aside and let him in. He glanced around my space at the whiteboard with client names, the modest setup, the small stack of business cards that just said, Grace Miller, Digital Strategy and Consulting. Then he set the folder down on my desk and flipped it open. Inside was a printed report with my name on it. Same spelling, same signature at the bottom, just 12 years younger and a lot more hopeful. "I've been trying to figure out if this was a coincidence," he said, "but it's not, is it?" I stared at the cover page. It was a market analysis and digital strategy proposal I'd written for a small startup agency more than a decade ago. At the time, a friend of a friend had introduced me to a guy whose marketing firm was circling the drain. I was just getting started in freelancing. I did the work practically for free because I needed a case study. "You were the one with the tiny office in that converted warehouse," I said slowly, memories slotting into place. "You were trying to land a food brand and you were about to lose your lease." Daniel let out a short breath that sounded like a laugh. "Yeah, that was me. We were about 2 weeks from shutting the doors. Then your report landed in my inbox. You'd torn apart our numbers, rebuilt the offer, and given us a step-by-step plan. I followed it, desperate, and we signed a multi-year contract. That client is the reason my agency exists today." He tapped the paper gently. "I kept this. I've quoted pieces of it in meetings, but the person who wrote it vanished. No website, no LinkedIn, no nothing. I tried to find you once and failed." My throat tightened. Back then, I'd been juggling 3 part-time jobs and taking on random gigs. I didn't even realize my work had made that big of a difference. "At the wedding," Daniel went on, "when your sister called you her failed little sister, I thought I must be mishearing. Then I saw your name on the place card." He looked me in the eyes. "Grace, the woman who helped save my business is not a failure." Heat rushed to my face, a mix of shame and anger I didn't know what to do with. "My family doesn't know about any of that," I said. "They don't really ask." "I gathered," he replied, jaw tightening. He hesitated, then added, I didn't just come to say thank you. There's something else you should know. We've been running an internal audit at the agency. Some of the irregularities involve your sister. And after what I saw last night, I realized I needed to talk to you directly. For the first time, it hit me that the look on his face at the wedding hadn't just been awkwardness. It had been recognition. And maybe a warning. Daniel sat down in the chair across from my desk, like he was bracing himself to deliver bad news to a client. I need you to understand, he said. I didn't walk into your wedding planning to talk business, but once I realized who you were and who she was, I couldn't ignore it anymore. He slid a second stack of papers out of the folder. This one didn't have my name on it. It had my sister's. We've been doing an internal audit for the last few months, he continued. We merged with another agency last year, and anytime there's a merger, you have to clean house. Policies, expenses, client credits. We started seeing patterns that didn't make sense. I forced myself to look at the top page. It was an email thread. A junior strategist laying out a campaign concept line by line, attaching early mock-ups and research, sending it all to Lydia late at night with a nervous, "What do you think?" At the bottom of the thread, there was a forwarded message to the client. Same idea, same language, just Lydia's name in the signature, and no mention of the junior at all. Daniel flipped to another page. This one was a performance review that mentioned a brilliant concept that secured a major fashion client, with Lydia listed as the creative lead. The bonus from this campaign alone was $35,000, he said quietly. Your sister collected it. The person who actually did the heavy lifting got a vague, great team player line on their review. My stomach twisted. I'd seen Lydia do minor versions of this in school, taking credit for group projects. But I'd convinced myself she'd grown out of it. Apparently not. Daniel turned to a spreadsheet highlighted in red. Then we got to the expenses, he said. Flights labeled as client retreats that lined up suspiciously well with her personal vacations. Designer shopping trips filed under wardrobe for client-facing meetings. Restaurant bills for just her and her husband, coded as client dinners. And then, he hesitated, looking almost sorry. Charges that coincided with wedding planning, dress fittings, venue deposits, payments to vendors. My pulse thudded in my ears. Are you saying she put her wedding on the company card? Not all of it, but enough of it, he replied. The total we've flagged so far is about $95,000 in questionable expenses over 2 years. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a second, trying to reconcile the image of my sister sobbing over centerpieces with the woman siphoning company money into her personal life. Why are you telling me this? I asked. If this is an HR issue, don't you just fire her and move on? Daniel clasped his hands together. Because this isn't just about her, he said. It exposed bigger problems with how the agency tracks credit, approves budgets, and signs off on expenses. Problems that nearly killed my first company until someone like you tore everything apart and rebuilt it. He nodded toward the old report with my name on it. I need that person again. For real this time. Paid what you should have been paid back then. He laid out the offer like he'd been rehearsing it. A 9-month contract. $200,000. My role would be to audit the way the merged agency handled marketing strategy and spending, redesign the approval process, and create a system where credit and money couldn't be quietly rerouted to whoever shouted the loudest. This isn't about revenge, he said. If the evidence stands, your sister will face consequences whether you're involved or not. I won't ask you to make decisions about her job. I want you focused on fixing the machine that let this happen. I swallowed hard. $200,000 was more money than I had ever made in a single year. It was enough to clear my debts, rebuild my savings after bailing out her wedding, and finally invest back into my own business instead of everyone else's dreams. There is one more thing, Daniel added, almost as an afterthought. When our auditors pulled statements, they noticed a few transfers out of your parents' account years ago that landed in your sister's name just before her grad school tuition payments. Those funds originally came from an education trust labeled with your initials. I don't know what that means for your family, but I thought you deserved to know your name has been quietly cleaning up after them for a very long time. For a moment I couldn't speak. Somewhere between rage and relief, a cold clarity settled in. My family had spent years calling me a failure while quietly using my opportunities and my money to prop up the daughter they were proud of. And now the one person they couldn't manipulate, my sister's boss, was sitting in my cramped office, offering me a chance not just to help fix his company, but to finally stop fixing their messes for free. I didn't give Daniel an answer on the spot. I asked for the weekend, went home, stared at the ceiling for hours, and thought about every time my parents had told me I was too soft and too scattered to handle anything big. By Monday morning, I'd signed the contract. If my family was going to keep using my name in their messes, then my name was finally going to pay me instead of draining me. The first few weeks at the agency were strangely surreal. I wasn't an employee. I was the outside consultant with full access. I sat in conference rooms with glass walls, combing through budgets and campaign reports, mapping out where money and credit were supposed to go versus where they actually ended up. I kept my head down and my tone neutral. I avoided my sister's floor completely. I was deep in an expense file one afternoon when my phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. "We need to talk. Now." She dropped a location pin for a bar around the corner and followed it with, "Please." Curiosity and dread dragged me there after work. When I walked in, she was at a high-top table, fingers wrapped so tight around a cocktail glass her knuckles were white. She looked nothing like the glowing bride from the photos. "You knew," she said as soon as I sat down. "You knew about the audit. That's why he was so weird at the wedding. That's why you're here." "I knew about the audit after he came to my office," I answered. "And I'm here because he hired me to fix the system, not to save you." Her eyes flashed. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You made me look like an idiot in front of my boss. You've always been jealous." I almost laughed. "Jealous of what? Being the one our parents sacrificed my future for?" She flinched, which told me Daniel's people had already started asking questions about those old transfers. Then she leaned in, lowering her voice. "They're saying I stole ideas, that I misused the company card. I need you to back me up. Just say you advised me on some of the strategy and the expenses, that it was all part of your consulting. If you vouch for me, Daniel will believe it. He worships your stupid report." "You want me to lie?" I said flatly. "To cover up the fact that you funneled company money into your wardrobe and your wedding and stole credit from a junior employee." "Business is messy," she snapped. "You of all people should understand that. You owe me, Grace. Mom and Dad gave me the education they couldn't give you. They chose me for the investment. That was for all of us." I stared at her, realizing she truly believed that my life had been a fair trade for her resume. "No," I said quietly. "What I owe is to myself. I'm not going to lie for you. Not again." She went still, then smiled a cold little smile I knew too well. "Fine," she said. "But when this blows up, don't say I didn't give you a chance to be loyal." I walked out, shaking, half tempted to quit the whole project. Instead, I went home, opened my laptop, and did what I do best. Followed the data. A few days later, the head of compliance emailed me asking if I had ever sent Lydia an internal memo about how to structure travel and wardrobe expenses to pass approval. Attached was a PDF. The email address in the header was almost mine, off by a single letter. The signature was a copy-paste of my logo. The tone even sounded like me. If I hadn't known better, I might have doubted my own memory. I pulled the metadata, checked the IP logs, and cross-referenced timestamps with internal swipe records. Whoever wrote it had been sitting at a company computer on a floor I never had access to, at a time when I was on a Zoom call with an external client that IT could verify. I sent Daniel and compliance my findings, every screenshot and log. On the day of the disciplinary hearing, I wasn't in the room. I sat in a small side office with a live feed of the conference room on a monitor, listening as HR went through each piece of evidence. The stolen campaign, the personal trips billed as business, the dress fittings coded as client meetings, the fake email supposedly from me instructing her how to get away with it. Lydia tried everything. She blamed overwork. She blamed confusing policies. She even tried to drag my name in, insisting she'd just followed my aggressive strategy advice. Then Daniel slid my report across the table and, in that calm voice I'd first heard at my door, walked them through the logs I'd provided. The fake email, created from her workstation. The exact timestamp, matching her keycard swipe. The fact that while the message was supposedly written under my name, I'd been on a recorded video call somewhere else entirely. Watching her face as the walls closed in, even through a screen, was like watching years of manipulation crack all at once. When HR finally said the words termination for gross misconduct and full repayment of misused funds and referral to law enforcement, Lydia didn't look enraged. She looked small. For the first time in our lives, her choices were finally landing on her shoulders instead of mine. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time, the weight shifting off me, one lie at a time. 3 months after Lydia was escorted out of the building with a cardboard box in her arms, I got a handwritten card in the mail from my Aunt Lorraine. She lived up in the suburbs outside Milwaukee, the one relative who sent birthday cards with little notes instead of group texts. The card said she was hosting a family dinner and that she would really appreciate it if I came. At the bottom, in smaller, messier handwriting, she'd added, "It's time we talk honestly." Against my better judgment, I drove up on a Sunday afternoon. When I walked into her house, everyone was already there. My parents were sitting stiffly on the couch. Lydia was at the dining table, staring into a glass of water like it might have answers, her wedding ring noticeably gone. My cousins Eric and Nina hovered in the kitchen doorway, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else. Dinner was awkward small talk and clinking silverware, the kind of strained politeness that makes you wish for a fire alarm. Nobody mentioned the agency. Nobody mentioned the wedding. It felt like we were all trying to pretend we were a normal family who didn't have fraud charges hanging over one daughter and a career-altering contract hanging over the other. Dessert plates were barely on the table when Aunt Lorraine stood up, cleared her throat, and looked straight at my parents. "I invited you all here because I'm tired of watching this family pretend it doesn't know who it's standing on," she said. My mother's smile froze. My father's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Lorraine turned to me. "6 years ago, when I had my heart surgery and the insurance wouldn't cover the full amount, your niece," she nodded at me, "drove up here, sat in that chair you're in now, and helped me negotiate with the hospital. When there was still a balance I couldn't pay, she quietly sent $30,000 through the hospital's assistance program so my pride wouldn't get in the way of my recovery." I felt every pair of eyes in the room swing toward me. Before anyone could speak, she went on. "When Eric lost his job and wanted to open his cafe, who wrote him a marketing plan and lent him $15,000 with no interest and no deadline?" Eric swallowed and whispered, "Grace did." "When Nina's startup failed and she couldn't make rent for 4 months, who wired money to her landlord directly so she wouldn't get evicted?" Nina's eyes were already wet. "It was Grace," she said. My parents shifted uncomfortably. Lydia stared harder at her glass. Then Aunt Lorraine took a breath and delivered the part she'd clearly been saving. And when your father's father left an education trust for each grandchild, including a $45,000 fund in Grace's name, who signed the paperwork to move that money into Lydia's tuition and living expenses instead? Silence dropped like a stone. My dad's face went red. My mom opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, "We did what we had to do for the child who was going to make something of herself. Grace was always so independent. We thought she'd figure it out." Lorraine's voice sharpened. "She did figure it out. That's why you thought you could steal from her and she'd survive it. And she did. But that doesn't make it right." Lydia muttered, "It was an investment in the family," without looking up, like she was reciting a line she'd heard her whole life. Nobody rushed to agree with her this time. For once, the room wasn't looking at her like the sun. They were looking at me, really seeing me, maybe for the first time. I didn't make a speech. I didn't yell. I just sat there, strangely calm, listening to the sound of their excuses collapse under the weight of facts they couldn't spin anymore. 8 months after that dinner at Aunt Lorraine's, my life looks nothing like the version my parents used to mock. I changed my number, blocked my parents' email addresses, muted every group chat that treated me like background noise, and quietly stopped showing up to holidays where I was only ever invited to play supporting actress in Lydia's story. There was no big blowout, no dramatic announcement. I just stopped volunteering to be hurt. The contract with Daniel's agency turned into the most intense, exhausting, and satisfying work I've ever done. We rebuilt how campaigns are credited so junior staff can't be erased with a single forward. We tightened expenses so nobody can slide a vacation through as a client retreat again. When the 9 months were up, Daniel asked me to stay on as a long-term advisor and offered me a small equity stake. For the first time, I wasn't just the ghost who fixed things from the shadows. I had a seat at the table, my name on the documents, and a team of younger strategists who looked at me like the kind of mentor I'd never had. I used part of that income to finally pay myself back. First for the wedding deposits I'd floated, then for the years I'd spent bailing people out instead of investing in my own future. I increased the rent on my office, hired an assistant, and started setting aside a dedicated fund for pro bono work so I could help small businesses without sacrificing my own stability. It's funny. Once I stopped throwing all my energy down the black hole of my family's expectations, I suddenly had enough to build something solid. I still hear about them through relatives. My parents are quieter now, less eager to brag. They tell people they don't really understand what happened with Lydia's job. Lydia's marriage didn't survive the scandal. With her reputation burned, she's been bouncing between temporary retail and contract work, still trying to find a ladder to climb. A younger version of me might have felt guilty about that, or tempted to swoop in and fix it. This version doesn't. Here's what I've learned. You can pour your whole life into people who decided a long time ago that you're the backup plan, and it will never be enough to make them see you differently. Kindness without boundaries isn't noble, it's self-erasure. Family is not a free pass for disrespect or exploitation. The people who truly love you won't ask you to lie, shrink, or destroy yourself to keep their image intact. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't a dramatic takedown. It's choosing yourself so completely that the people who called you a failure have to watch you succeed from a distance they created. If you've ever had to pick your own sanity over your family's approval, you're not selfish. You're finally safe. Tell me in the comments if you've lived through something like this, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind you your worth isn't up for debate, no matter who tries to put a label on you.
Our team at Revenge Argon is dedicated to creating meaningful, emotionally rich storylines that keep viewers engaged while still sending a positive message. We promise that all of our stories are completely fictional and are designed only to share life lessons and educational, valuable knowledge with our audience. Lydia isn't just a mean sister here. She's the kind of villain who builds her whole identity on stealing credit, abusing trust, and stepping on the very person holding her life together. Even after burning through Grace's money, opportunities, and reputation, she still expected loyalty on demand. If you were in Grace's shoes, how would you deal with someone like Lydia? Cut her off completely, give her strict second chances, or expose everything and let the consequences fall?